So what I'm going to do today is take a practice shoot here in our master bathroom, and then we'll jump over to the computer, go through the editing process, and I'll show you guys my steps from the beginning to the end, and hopefully it gives you a little bit of clarification for all you new editors and real estate photographers out there to be able to get an understanding of what that process looks like and how to get that HDR look finished. So what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be taking two sets of pictures. I'll do one HDR and one with flash and ambient shot, also called Flambient. And I'll show you what the final products of those two look together, and you guys can decide for yourselves which process you want to use. But I'll go ahead and put them both on the YouTube channel here, that way you guys can see the process. Alright guys, and you can see I got my shot lined up here in the bathroom. First one we're going to be doing is a HDR shot, and so what I got here is auto exposure bracketing set up. So you go to menu, exposure, and then I got it 2 stops apart, so -2, 0, and 2. And we'll get back in here, and I got my shot lined up. You can see the red outlay. That's because I have a manual focus lens, and so that just kind of gives you an outline of what's in focus. And so what I usually do is focus on the furthest point of the room, and as you can see I have the blinds pulled up for the windows. That way it's a little bit easier of a window pull when I go to do that later in Photoshop. And so I try to keep my ISO low. ISO's at 100, adjust the shutter speed, and then my aperture is set to 8, and it's a manual aperture. Manual aperture on the camera as well. So we'll go ahead and take the shot. And I have a 2-second delay just to avoid any kind of jitters and stuff from touching the shutter button. And you can see, took 3 shots here. 1, 2, 3. All right, so that is our HDR shot, and we'll go ahead and edit that in. Switch back into Lightroom and Photoshop here on the computer. Alright guys, we're back in the bathroom here, and as you can see I still have the same composition as before. Everything's still in focus, and what we're going to do is called a Flambient shot. And so the first thing I do is I take the ambient shot, and that just means it's using the lights that are already existing in the room. So coming in from the windows, I have the recessed lights on the ceiling. I left off this light that you can see right above the mirror here just because the yellow color cast that it puts out just creates more work for me later on, and so I don't necessarily need it on to brighten up the room. So I'm going to leave that off, and that's usually what I do when you get harsh yellow lights like that. And so first thing we're going to do, have my external flash here, but I'm going to leave it off, and we have the ambient shot first. So first thing I do is I expose 1 stop above. So for me, that's going to be 1/30 shutter speed. ISO, I keep it right around 400 or 500. I still have my aperture set at 8, like I was doing earlier for the HDR. And we'll go ahead and take this shot. Nice. All right, so here, let me pull this back up. As you can see, not super bright, not super dark, kind of just somewhere in the middle. And what this shot does is it allows me to mask over any harsh shadows that I'm going to get from this flash shot. So that's really the only purpose of this one. And since we are shooting in RAW, I'll be able to bump the shadows up and bring the brightness down a little bit and be able to brighten this room up without introducing any extra noise. So now that this one's done, let's go back into the next thing I do for my flash shot is, so we're 1 stop above. I'm going to bring it down to dead center and do my flash shot. So you'll see the only thing changing is the shutter speed. I don't mess with ISO. Do not mess with the aperture. Leave the rest of that the same. Try to create the least amount of variables that you got to change in between shots to speed up your process. I'm going to turn on my speed light, and I usually put it at half speed here, so right in the middle, half power, sorry. Alright guys, so I had to give myself a 10-second timer to be able to do this. And you'll see I got this pointed up towards the ceiling. There we go. So let's check out this shot. And you can see this is a pretty good shot. There's really no harsh shadows. Windows look fine. I'm not even going to do another shot for the window pulls because I have glazed windows in here, and that's about as clear as it can get. That's exactly what my eyes are seeing right now looking through the windows. So this is a honestly good enough shot just to use. But we always take the ambient shot just as a backup to be able to cover up any harsh shadows that we're going to get, which sometimes you'll get from ceiling fans and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and get back to the computer and start doing our editing in Lightroom and Photoshop. Alright guys, we're back in front of the computer here, and I'm going to walk you through the process I do of importing the images into Lightroom, and then doing the edits and tweaks that we got to do in there, getting the profile set up, and then I'll show you how to bring it over into Photoshop and do the corrections that we got to do there, and then we'll bring it back into Lightroom, do the final editing, and then do our export and get our images ready. So like I said, you'll be seeing the HDR images first, and then you'll be seeing the Flambient images after that. So let's get into it here. Alright guys, so we're in Lightroom Classic here, and the first thing we're going to do is import our photos. So we'll go into wherever you stored them. And we got all our photos here, so those are first 3, which are HDR, last 2, which are Flambient. Import them. Alright, so those are ready. First thing I'm going to do is apply my lens corrections. So pre-composite, I think it's going to be this one. Alright, so what this does is, here when I switch over to develop, you'll see that it just takes all of our images and puts our lens in there. So I'm using a Samyang 14mm, and it's applied that. I don't do anything with correcting the verticals until the very end, in case I have to reuse another copy of something like that, and then it'll be a headache. So you can see it's a little crooked, but we'll fix this at the very end, right before we export the photo. And for my preset, which one are we looking at first here? So this is the middle exposure for HDR. And here, let me do this. First thing I'm going to do is combine these. So photo merge, HDR. I leave all the defaults the same. And while this finishes up, I'll go ahead and show you how I edit my Flambient photos. So we'll go ahead and speed this process up a little bit so you guys don't have to sit and wait on a progress bar. Alright, so those are creating an HDR photo. Now let's look at our ambient shot. And what I'm looking at here is the histogram. So I do have a little bit of peaking, and this is for the bulk of the information. I want it to be right in this range, so right in between the middle and the end, kind of like sitting dead center in the middle of those two. And so what I'm trying to do is just adjust these two so they are pretty close to being one another. That way when I go to blend them in Photoshop later, it won't be as harsh of a blend. You'll see they'll kind of flow in together a little bit better. So I'm gonna bring this exposure up a little bit, like right there, and bring some shadows up. Yeah, I'll be honest, guys, there's a new method I'm trying, and it's gonna seem a little crazy, but bring shadows all the way up, bring highlights all the way down, and then I'll use the white and blacks to actually set my photo where I want it to be. So let's say right about there. And then my blacks, I'll bring it until you see the, so if you see right here, I'm watching to wait for this first little peak to get close to touching the edge. So you'll watch as I adjust the blacks. I'm looking at the histogram. I'm not actually looking at the photo here. So right about there. That way my blacks look black, the whites look white. I don't mess with texture, clarity, dehaze, none of that stuff yet. And here, let me show you what we are going to be removing in the color cast. So we have some blues leaking in. You can see them right here in the reflection and then over here in the corner. So we're going to be completely removing those. Which if they're in this photo, I could technically just bring the desaturation all the way down and call it a day. But for those of you that are doing this and wind up having like a blue chair or something else that's supposed to be blue in the photo, that's usually when you want to go and do it in Photoshop. So for the sake of that, I'll just pretend that I have something blue in here. You can see some of the aquas are leaking in as well, so we can fix that. And then on the wall we have, so my counters are actually white, and so looks like coming from the ceiling can lights, it's starting to bleed a little bit of yellow onto the countertop. So we'll fix that. But obviously you can see here on this window light, or yeah, light right above the mirror, we have those Edison bulbs, and those are actually yellow. And so if I desaturate them, it completely removes the yellow out of that and makes, that's not what it's supposed to look like. So that's a good situation in which we would use Photoshop. And then let's take a look at oranges. So we have some oranges bleeding from the can lights onto that back wall, and then onto the rug, a little bit on the floor right as soon as you get into the tub, and then obviously the stool in the back corner there, that is brown, so we don't want to completely desaturate that. So just another situation where Photoshop comes in handy instead of doing this in Lightroom. I don't mess with sharpening. We already have a lens profile. So this looks pretty good for our ambient shot. Now let's look at our flash shot. Flash is a little bit brighter, and this is the base layer that we're going to use in Photoshop. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave exposure alone. I'm going to bring the highlights down. I don't know if I want to bring the shadows all the way up. That looks a little too bright for me. I might keep it right around there. And then I mess with the whites, like I said, so right about there. And then let's bring the blacks way down to right there. Maybe a little bit higher. Right about there. Okay, so look at the histograms here when I flip between the two. They're pretty close. Yeah, let me do this. I think I need to bring exposure up a little bit more. Let's look at this now. Alright, I think that's better. Let's do that. So, alright, let's go ahead and we're going to pull our Flambient shot into Photoshop. So we're going to highlight this, right click, and edit, open as layers in Photoshop. While that's doing that, let's go back. Looks like our HDR shot is ready. And we're going to unstack these. And you can see here from the file name, this is the HDR shot. Let's see how this looks. Let me wait for this Photoshop to get out of the way here. Let's move this over. I'll come back to that. So here's our HDR shot. Little on the dark side, but since we shot in RAW and since we have the information from all 3 photos, we can really push this image as far as possible. So we have our lens profile. Now our white balance was auto white balance, so I don't mess with that. I don't mess with contrast. Let's start with taking the highlights all the way down. So now we have our window pulled back. Let's bring up some shadows. I actually brought them up all the way like I was saying earlier. And now I will adjust my exposure. So exposure, I want to put it kind of where I had the other one. And we'll adjust whites. So here we are losing some information. You can see right here, this is getting cut off. So we're going to bring it back down until we get that back right there. And then our blacks, we're going to keep bringing those until this histogram kind of stretches across the whole thing. So I think I'm going to leave my blacks right around here. And that looks good for me. So since it's an HDR shot, I think what I'm going to do is bring this, and you can see we're still going to have blues. Looks like we actually got a little bit more blues in this HDR shot. We could bring those down, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to, yeah, lots of yellow still, and oranges. So it brought our first image in. This is our Flambient. This is our HDR. So let's start with the Flambient. And we have our flash shot. This is our flash shot. So we have our flash shot. And the way you know that is when you see the eyeball right here, that lets you know which image you're looking at. So I hid the ambient shot, which is on top. Let's bring it back. That's our ambient. That's our flash. First thing I do is I rename them. Flash, ambient, and I will highlight both of these, and I have a hotkey for it, but what I do first is go to image, where is it? Auto align layers. So we'll hit that. Just leave these the same, click auto. And what it's going to do is if there is any movement at all between the 2 shots, it's going to align these up, and you can see there's a little gray and white bar up across here, so which means I did accidentally bump the camera a little bit in between those 2 shots. But now they're aligned. So now when I go to brush in the top layer, it's actually going to make sure it's in the right spot and not off-centered from the other one. So now that they're aligned, what we're going to do is we're going to paint in our ambient layer. So what we're doing is click this. So we're highlighting our ambient layer now. We're going to, for Windows, hold the Alt key. I think it's Option for Mac, and click Add Layer Mask. So what that did is that just hid the ambient layer. So now we are the only, even though the eyeball's still here, the only thing we can see is the flash layer. And we're going to go to our paintbrush. We're going to keep our flow right around 20%, and then make sure the white box is checked. So black box won't do anything because it's trying to take away the ambient layer, but we haven't put any on there yet. So let's switch it to white, and this is going to paint in the ambient layer over the flash. So what we can do is start painting. And what we're really trying to do is remove some of the harsh shadows. So you can see there's a little bit of a shadow here, and reduce this a little bit. See, when you paint that in, what it's doing is it's painting in the ambient layer. So honestly, I actually like the way the flash shot looks better on this part of the reflection. So zoom out. What we're really doing is looking for a harsh shadow, which normally what you're doing is just covering up the ceiling fan blades, because the light's not typically coming from left from where I was shooting from. It's usually coming in from the ceilings and the windows, which is going to give the fan blades a normal shadow. But when you take a flash shot, it puts it in the wrong direction and your eyes don't really account for that, and it kind of looks weird. So that's what we're fixing. But honestly, in a room like this without a fan, there ain't really much to fix. You can kind of cover up some of the glare. Let me see. Yeah, I think the flash shot actually looks a little better in the windows, so we'll take that out. But yeah, so what you would do is, with the white layer selected, you would just kind of paint in any areas that look like they need touching up. And yeah, once you're okay with the image, you're going to control click. So I'm highlighting both of these layers. Control E, which is going to merge them together, just to shrink the file size of the file when you put it back in to Lightroom. And then I'm going to right click, duplicate layer, and now I'm going to remove color cast. So I'll usually just name this adjust, and you will go to filters, camera raw filter, which is kind of like a mini Lightroom that you can open up. So we're going to open this up. And now we're back looking at our saturation on the colors. So that's in Color Mixer. So you can see we still have blues. Where'd it go? Yeah, we got some blues over in the corner there. So we're going to bring those all the way down. We have some yellows. I feel like the yellows aren't too bad. So those back to, I might just desaturate these a little bit. Right there. And then we had some aquas. Just a tiny bit in the reflection in the mirror. Let's see. Alright, you can see on the ceiling here, with the green all the way saturated, there's a big green spot right there. So I'm going to desaturate that. I'm not going to touch the windows, so that'll stay green. And so we're bringing down greens, aquas, and blues. Okay, and now we're going to do the same thing we did earlier with Flambient, or with the ambient layer. We're going to Alt, Layer Mask. We have our brush. We have our flow at 20%. And now we're just going to paint out the color casts. So, basically just painting. And I know these ceiling tiles are actually blue, so I'm going to try really hard not to get over those. And the ceiling's green right there. And if you need to hit the, gosh, what is this? Slash key, I don't know what it's called. It's right above the enter key on a keyboard. That'll give you a red overlay letting you know where you haven't painted, and then I'll just usually touch up the rest of the the wall here. Just you don't have to touch all of it, guys. It's not going to be that noticeable to the naked eye, but for you, and if you're wanting to improve your quality and have an eye for that stuff, this is what you want to be looking out for. And then just hit that same key again. So my walls are white, which is true to the eye. My bathroom actually has bright white walls, so this looks the way I want it to. I'm pretty happy with this. The windows stayed the same. This is what my windows look like, guys. It's not a blown out image. It's actually, we have the frosted glass windows, so that's actually pretty true. And I'm happy with everything else. So we're going to click both of these again, Control E, and they are merged together. And last thing I think I need to do is close it and bring it back into Lightroom. So we're going to do that. File, close, save, and that's going to put us back into Lightroom. And let's go ahead and open that back up, and you should see a new image here. It's going to be a .tiff file, so that's the one that just popped up. Yep, it's a .tiff file, and all of our color casts are gone, the blues are gone. This image looks pretty good. Only last thing I'm going to do is bring up clarity a little bit. You don't usually go higher than 10. Put like 5 or 6 dehaze. And I'll mess with texture. And last thing I'll do is I'll go to transform, go to guided, and pick something on the left, something on the right. So I'll start with this. So that's a straight one, and then over here on the mirror. Boom. Okay, now our verticals are straight. Hit done. And now this image is ready for export. And this is our finished Flambient shot. Alright guys, now we're back in and we are editing our HDR image. So first thing I'm going to do is duplicate this layer, and I'll call this Windows. Now I got my Windows layer. Okay, so we have a duplicate layer. And now we are going to create a brightness layer. Bring brightness down to about right there. And then we combine these. Control E. There we go. So now when we do our pen tool, there's layers. Now when we do our pen tool, 2, 3, 4, 5. Shift Control Enter. That'll close the loop, and then do the same thing over here. Right there. Shift Control Enter. Okay, now we'll create a layer mask. There we go. So now we brought our windows in from our top layer, which was a little bit darker. So windows without windows. Okay. So now that those are combined, Control click. So both of these layers are selected, and then hit Control E. It's going to merge them together. Last thing to do, create another duplicate layer. Call it Adjust, and on this one we're going to go into our Camera Raw filter. We're going to zoom out. Actually, there we go. So let's look at what we have in this room. We have greens. Desaturate the greens. We have aquas. You can see it here on the mirror. Desaturate the aquas. We have blues spilling over by the tub, so we're going to desaturate those. Yellows look kind of normal. I think I'm going to leave those alone. Maybe bring it to -20 something. And then our orange. Don't want it to look like a black and white photo. So I think this one I'm going to keep it at like -5. Okay. Okay, so we have a very desaturated layer. Let me get centered back up here. Very desaturated layer. And what we're going to do is create a layer mask. So Alt on a Windows, Option on a Mac, Alt click. Let's get our paintbrush right here. Keep our flow at around 20%, that's fine. And click the bracket keys to make your paintbrush bigger and smaller. And last thing you gotta do is make sure you're on white. When you're on white, you are painting in the top layer onto the bottom layer. When you're on black, you're removing. So adding, removing. Let's keep it on add. And you'll see I'm starting to desaturate the blues and the aquas and the greens. You'll see this ceiling and these walls go from all their different rainbow colors to bright white, which is what they are actually supposed to be. So this is the fun part, just going through and painting. Some blues in the corner there. And if you need to, hit the, on a keyboard, hit the button right above enter. It's like the / key. It'll show you where you're missing. So I'll usually hit everything except spots that I know need to stay the same color. So windows are going to stay the same color. There's probably some overlay on here. There's a green plant, so we don't want to desaturate that. And if you do accidentally go over a spot you don't want to, all you need to do is click the X key. X will add it back in. You see it change back to black. And let's put that back in there. That's supposed to be green. Hit X again, and you can go back to the way it was. So we're going to keep painting until you're at a spot where things look good. And then hit the / key to go back. And that's where we're at. That looks good to me. I'm going to Control click, Control E, merge these two together, and then File, Close, Save, and this is going to put me back in Lightroom. Alright, so we're back in Lightroom. Here's our HDR image, and you'll know it's the one from Photoshop because it ends in a TIFF file. So hdredit.tiff. So last thing we do here is I will add a little bit of clarity, maybe bump it up to 9. I don't usually go above 10. And then dehaze, I'll keep that at like a 5. Just adding a little bit more clarity to the image. I'm going to say everything else looks pretty good. I bring exposure up, and then last thing you do is fix our verticals. So we'll hit guided, click on something on the left, right, something on the left, and those are fixed. And that's it. And that is our finished HDR image.